It was a cold day, colder than any the alien explorers had ever encountered. Their advanced thermal suits, built to withstand the harshest of environments, were failing them. The human colony on the icy world had been a curiosity from the start. When the aliens first landed, they expected to encounter weak, fragile creatures, struggling to survive in an unforgiving environment. They were wrong. Very wrong. What the aliens didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly understood, was that humanity had a survival instinct so strong, so deeply ingrained in their biology, that it had evolved over millennia, shaped by the toughest winters, the harshest storms, and the most extreme weather on Earth. What the aliens saw as a challenge, humans saw as an opportunity to adapt, to thrive, to fight back. The aliens thought they had mastered everything, from the depths of space to the intricate ecosystems of alien worlds. They had underestimated the resilience of humanity. The planet's biting cold was no match for the human spirit. The explorers were just beginning to realize this as their ship's systems malfunctioned, as the terrain they thought they could navigate with ease became a labyrinth of ice and snow. It wasn't just the environment that was against them, it was the humans who lived here. The humans who had learned to endure, to push through the freezing nights and the howling blizzards, who had built their homes in the most hostile conditions imaginable. As the alien team trudged forward, their steps slowing in the deep snow, they couldn't understand how humans were thriving in this cold, how they managed to move with such purpose and clarity. Their advanced technology was failing them, while the humans seemed completely unfazed. A team of explorers, each one technologically superior to the next, was now struggling to perform basic tasks that humans performed every day without even thinking. But it wasn't just the cold. There were other weather afflictions they couldn't comprehend. The sudden storms that whipped up out of nowhere. The blinding snow that obscured their vision, forcing them to rely on technology that kept glitching. The lightning strikes, the violent winds, the sudden freezing rains. To the aliens, this was nothing short of a hostile, unpredictable nightmare. But to the humans, it was just another day. The leader of the alien team, a seasoned veteran who had conquered countless worlds, found himself trembling. He looked up at the sky and saw a storm approaching, a storm unlike anything they had ever encountered. His crew scrambled to find shelter, but the humans just stood there, seemingly unfazed by the rising winds and darkening sky. They had no fear. They had lived through far worse. "What is it about them?" the leader muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He couldn't understand it. The humans weren't supposed to be like this. They were supposed to be fragile, weak, unprepared for anything beyond their small world. But here they were, facing elements that could kill a lesser being in minutes, and they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. In a last-ditch effort to understand, the alien leader approached one of the humans. The human, a figure wrapped in thick layers of protective clothing, stood alone, facing the incoming storm. His breath formed a cloud in the air, but he didn't flinch. The alien tried to speak, but the human's response was simple, a single word that sent a chill down his spine. "Survive." That was it. A single word, but it was enough. The alien leader realized then that this wasn't just about physical endurance. This wasn't just about adapting to the cold or the storms. It was something deeper, something inherent in the very nature of humanity. The human spirit, their will to survive against all odds, was their greatest weapon. The aliens had encountered countless species across the galaxy, each one adapting to their environment in their own way. Some had evolved with powerful technology. Some had harnessed the elements themselves, while others relied on brute strength. But none had this. None had this drive to push forward, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. It was this willpower that the aliens could not comprehend. The storm intensified. The wind howled, and the snow began to fall in thick, blinding sheets. The humans seemed almost to welcome it, their movements sure and steady. The aliens, on the other hand, struggled. They clung to their technology, to their gadgets and suits, but nothing worked. They were helpless in the face of the weather, their equipment freezing and malfunctioning, while the humans, the so-called weaklings, were walking circles around them. Just when the situation seemed dire, when the storm appeared ready to swallow them whole, the humans turned. Without a word, without any sign of panic, they led the way. Through the snow, through the storm, they guided the aliens to shelter. They didn't need fancy technology or complex systems. They only needed their instincts, their knowledge of this world, and the unwavering determination to survive. But the aliens weren't the only ones shocked by the humans' resilience. The humans had been watching the aliens too, observing the strange visitors with equal parts curiosity and wariness. They knew that this cold world was theirs, that they had earned the right to survive here. They knew that they were the true masters of this environment, not these visitors from the stars. As the storm raged outside, the humans and aliens found themselves trapped together in a small underground shelter. The wind howled above them, but inside it was eerily silent. The aliens stared at the humans, trying to make sense of what had just happened, of how their advanced technology had failed them so completely. But then, in the silence, a single human spoke. "You think you understand survival," he said, his voice low, "but you have no idea what it takes to live on a planet like this." The alien leader looked at the human, his mind racing. He had encountered countless species, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. But the humans, they were something else. Something far more dangerous than anything he had ever imagined. And that's when the real shock came. What the aliens didn't realize, what they hadn't yet learned, was that the humans' resistance to the cold wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a matter of pride. The planet they called home was harsh, unforgiving, but it was theirs. And in that, they had something far more powerful than any advanced technology, any weapon, any alien force. But the question remained, would the aliens be able to learn from this, or would they continue to underestimate humanity? The tension in the air was palpable, and the story was just beginning to unfold. The shelter was small, but it offered a rare moment of respite from the storm outside. The walls were made of thick, solid ice, and the temperature inside was slightly warmer than the freezing winds howling just beyond the entrance. Despite the calmness of their surroundings, the air inside was heavy, thick with uncertainty. The humans sat silently in the dim light, their eyes wary, their expressions unreadable. The alien crew huddled together, their technology flickering, still struggling to keep up with the rapidly changing conditions. It was a situation unlike any they had faced before. The human who had spoken earlier, the one who had so confidently claimed that the aliens had no idea what it took to survive on this planet, watched the alien leader closely. The leader tried to meet his gaze, but found it difficult. There was something in those eyes, a deep, unspoken understanding of the world they inhabited, a quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. The alien leader, despite his vast experience in space, felt a strange unease stir in his chest. "How long can we stay here?" one of the alien crew members asked, his voice betraying the thin veneer of calm he was trying to maintain. "The storm's getting worse outside." We won't survive if we don't figure something out soon." The human turned toward the group, his face unreadable, yet there was a certain coldness in his eyes, as though he had seen this kind of panic before. He didn't respond immediately, instead glancing toward the thick ice walls that surrounded them. The storm raged louder, as if to remind them of the power it held over them. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke again, his voice low but clear. "You're not ready for this world," he said simply. "None of you are." The words hung in the air like a thick fog. The alien crew shifted uncomfortably, their minds racing as they tried to process what the human had just said. How could they not be ready? They had come prepared. Their technology was far more advanced than anything the humans could muster. But as the storm outside intensified, they realized the human wasn't talking about technology. He was talking about something else. Something that could not be measured in circuits or calculations. The alien leader opened his mouth to speak, but the human interrupted him. "You came here expecting to conquer this planet, didn't you?" The human's voice wasn't accusatory, just factual, as though he knew exactly what the aliens were thinking. "You think you can just come to a place like this, with your superior technology, and everything will bend to your will?" The alien leader stiffened. He had heard similar words from countless other species across the galaxy. It was a line of thinking he had encountered many times before, the idea that those with power, those with the most advanced tools, could shape the world around them. But here, on this frozen planet, it felt different. The human was right. The technology, the weapons, the suits that were supposed to protect them, none of it was enough. This planet, this environment, was something far more brutal than they had imagined. "You're not the first to think like that," the human continued, his gaze never leaving the alien leader's face. "And you won't be the last. But you're also the first to truly understand how wrong you are." The words cut through the silence like a blade. The alien crew exchanged nervous glances, and the leader's mind raced. What was this human trying to say? Was he suggesting that the aliens had been naive, that they had underestimated the resilience of this world and its people? The human stood up, his movements slow but purposeful. He walked toward a corner of the shelter, where a small fire burned, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The alien leader watched him closely. There was something almost primitive about the way the human moved, as though he was in tune with the planet in a way the aliens could never be. The human picked up a piece of charred wood from the fire and turned to face the group. His expression had softened, but there was a quiet intensity about him. "You think you've seen survival, but you haven't. Not until you've lived through a storm like the ones we face here. Not until you've fought against the cold that can freeze you from the inside out. This world doesn't care about your tech, your weapons, or your science. It doesn't bend to your will. It's a force, one you can either respect or perish under." The alien leader was silent. He had never encountered anything like this before. In his experience, technology had always been the ultimate solution. It was the key to survival, to domination, to everything. But here, in this frigid, unforgiving world, the technology was failing them. And worse, the humans seemed to thrive in it. It was almost as if the cold itself had become a part of them. He could feel it, the weight of their survival, the certainty in their eyes that they had mastered something far more powerful than any starship or weapon. "What are you telling us?" the leader asked, his voice barely a whisper, as though afraid to hear the answer. The human walked closer, his eyes locked onto the leader's. "I'm telling you that you'll never conquer this planet. Not with your ships, not with your technology. You'll only survive here if you learn how to live with it, if you learn to respect it, to understand it. The alien crew shifted uncomfortably. Some were still trying to get their systems online, to reconnect their broken equipment, but the cold continued to seep in relentlessly, slowly, as if mocking their every attempt. The humans' words resonated in their minds, gnawing at their confidence, shattering their sense of control. "We know your kind," the human continued, almost as if speaking to himself. "You come, you take, and you leave. But you can't take this. Not here." The leader felt a growing tension in his chest. What the human said was true. They had traveled across the galaxy, taking what they wanted from the worlds they visited. Resources, knowledge, dominance. And yet, here they were, trapped, powerless, surrounded by the very force they thought they could control. It was more than just a planet. It was an entity in itself. Something alive. Something they hadn't prepared for. "We'll survive," the leader finally said, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince the human or himself. "We always do." The human nodded slowly, his gaze never wavering. "You'll survive for now. But just remember, this place, it doesn't forget. And it never forgives." The alien leader couldn't shake the feeling that the human's words were more than just a warning. They were a prophecy. And as the storm continued to rage outside, one question loomed larger than any other. Could they really survive here, or had they made a grave mistake by underestimating the planet and its people? The tension in the shelter grew unbearable, the storm's fury outside mirroring the uncertainty inside. The aliens had no answers. Only time would tell if they could adapt, or if the planet would claim yet another victim. The storm outside raged on, its howl growing louder, fiercer. The shelter, once a haven from the freezing winds, now felt more like a cage. The alien leader stood at the entrance, his eyes glued to the swirling white chaos beyond, watching as the storm threatened to tear the planet apart. The cold seeped through every crack, every inch of the walls. He could feel it in his bones, creeping in slowly, relentlessly. For the first time since his crew's arrival, he wasn't sure what to do. The humans remained unmoved. They sat around the fire, quiet, their expressions unreadable. It was as though the storm had become a part of them, an old friend they had known for centuries. The alien leader found it both fascinating and terrifying. He had been to countless worlds, faced dangers in places that would make even the bravest shiver. But this was different. He felt a growing sense of unease, a nagging feeling that no matter how much technology they had, no matter how much power they thought they wielded, they were nothing here. This planet, these people, were on a different level of existence. One of his crew members, a younger officer, broke the silence. "We can't just sit here. The storm's going to break our shelter apart. We need to leave, find another way out. We can't stay here and wait for it to pass." The human who had spoken earlier didn't flinch at the young officer's words. Instead, he simply looked over at him, his eyes calm but piercing. "You think running will save you?" he asked. His voice was steady, almost as if he were speaking to a child. "The storm isn't going to pass. It's not about escaping. It's about surviving. This world doesn't give you the luxury of running away." The officer's face twisted in frustration. "We can't survive here much longer. We need to act, not just sit around and wait." The alien leader could sense the tension growing. His crew, once confident in their ability to handle any situation, was now on the brink of panic. Their technology had failed them, and the storm outside wasn't letting up. But it wasn't just the weather that was beginning to break them. It was the humans. Their unshakable calm, their quiet resolve, and worst of all, their understanding of this hostile world. "What do we do then?" the officer snapped, his patience wearing thin. "How are we supposed to survive if we do nothing?" The human didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, slowly, as though the action itself took a tremendous amount of energy. His eyes locked with the alien leaders again, and for a brief moment, the leader could have sworn he saw something more than just a survivalist in those eyes. There was a challenge there, a silent dare. "Your kind's been to many places," the human said, his voice now rough with something almost like pity. "You've conquered planets, you've bent other species to your will. But here, your power doesn't matter. Your weapons won't protect you. Your tech won't save you. The only thing that will help you here is what you have inside you." The alien leader didn't speak. He couldn't. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The human was right. Their tech, their suits, their ships, all of it had failed. None of it mattered in the face of this world, of the cold that seemed to pulse with life. For the first time in his career, the alien leader realized that they were no longer in control. The storm wasn't just an obstacle. It was a force, a living thing, determined to test every ounce of their strength. The shelter trembled as the wind outside grew louder, the snow pounding against the walls with unrelenting fury. The ice around them began to creak and groan. The alien leader could see his crew's fear mounting. They had thought they could adapt to the planet's cold, but this was something else entirely. They weren't just fighting the storm anymore. They were fighting something deeper, something they couldn't comprehend. The storm was a warning, a reminder that this planet wasn't just a place to be conquered. It was a challenge, a test. Suddenly, the walls of the shelter shook violently, a deep, gut-wrenching crack echoing through the air. Ice shards rattled on the floor, and the fire flickered wildly. The leader's heart raced as he turned to his crew, his voice rising in urgency. "We need to get out. Now, the shelter's not going to hold." The humans, however, remained eerily calm. The one who had spoken earlier simply looked at the leader with a faint shake of his head. "Running won't help you now. The storm isn't just outside. It's inside you. It's inside everyone who steps onto this world and thinks they can control it. You're not going to escape this." The alien leader's frustration reached a boiling point. "We'll make it out. We've come too far to give up now." But the human didn't seem to care about their stubbornness. His gaze hardened. "Then you'll die trying." The storm outside grew even more intense. The shelter's walls creaked again, and this time a chunk of ice cracked off, sending a shower of snow into the room. The fire sputtered and went out. The entire shelter was plunged into darkness. In the absolute silence that followed, the air felt heavier than ever before. The alien crew scrambled for their equipment, panic beginning to seep into their movements. The human, however, didn't move. He simply stood still in the dark, his eyes glowing faintly in the low light. The alien leader felt a sense of helplessness creep over him. The technology was useless, the shelter wasn't safe, and the storm was closing in. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The entire shelter shook violently, and the noise from outside, the wind, the snow, the violence of the storm became a deafening roar. A crack ran through the ice beneath their feet. It was as though the very planet itself was awakening, ready to devour everything in its path. The alien leader turned to face the humans, but they were already moving calmly, deliberately, as though they had known this would happen all along. The human who had spoken earlier gave the leader one last look, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he stepped toward the entrance of the shelter, his movements steady despite the chaos around him. The alien leader's mind raced. Could they follow? Could they survive? But it was already too late. The storm had already begun to claim its prize. The ground trembled beneath their feet again, more violently this time, as though the entire planet was waking up. The alien leader stumbled, grabbing the nearest support beam to steady himself. His crew followed suit, their fear mounting as the walls of the shelter cracked further, the ice groaning ominously. Outside, the storm howled, the winds deafening, but it wasn't just the weather that was terrifying them now. Something else was moving beneath the surface, something they couldn't see but could certainly feel. The human who had been so calm through all of it moved toward the entrance, his pace unfaltering despite the chaos. His face remained eerily composed, as though he knew exactly what was coming. The alien leader's instincts screamed at him to stop him, to demand answers, but he was paralyzed, unsure whether his crew would even survive the next few minutes, let alone follow the human's lead. "Where are you going?" the leader finally shouted, his voice rough, full of panic. The human didn't turn around, but his voice cut through the roar of the storm like a knife. "To survive," he said simply, his words not offering any further explanation. "You're welcome to stay here and wait for your tech to fail you completely, but the planet will decide soon enough who gets to leave and who doesn't." It was then that the ground shook again, even harder this time, and the shelter's ice walls cracked in several places, sending shards flying in every direction. The fire had long since gone out, and now, with the structure itself crumbling around them, it was clear that their refuge was no longer safe. The alien crew scrambled for their equipment, but the urgency in their movements was tempered by a growing realization. Their technology, their superiority, had failed them. They were no longer the masters of this world. They were powerless in the face of its unpredictable fury. Panic began to take hold, and the once steady leadership of the alien leader started to crack under the pressure. His mind raced. What had the human meant? What was happening to the planet? Just as the alien leader opened his mouth to shout an order, the ground shook again. This time, the tremor was so violent that the walls of the shelter split wide open. The shelter collapsed into the snow, the ice crumbling into jagged pieces. The alien leader shielded his face with his arm as debris rained down, the force of the collapse pushing him to the ground. But as the dust settled and the storm raged on outside, a strange silence fell. The alien leader looked up, disoriented, his heart pounding in his chest. His crew was in chaos, some trapped under rubble, others scrambling to regroup. But one thing stood out. The human, the one who had been so sure of himself, was nowhere to be seen. A sinking feeling spread through the leader's chest. Where had he gone? Had he left them to die here in this frozen hell? Had he somehow anticipated the destruction that was about to unfold? Then, as if to answer his question, a deep rumbling sound shook the earth beneath them. It was unlike anything they had felt before, a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. The alien leader's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. It wasn't just the storm. It wasn't just the cold. The planet itself was reacting, shifting, moving in ways they couldn't possibly comprehend. What's happening? One of the crew members gasped, his voice shaking with fear. What is this? The alien leader didn't have an answer. He couldn't. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of the humans' cryptic warnings. The planet wasn't just cold and inhospitable. It wasn't just a test of survival. It was alive. Or, perhaps, more accurately, it was responding to them. It was as though the very essence of this world had sensed their presence, had recognized them as invaders. And now it was retaliating. The rumbling grew louder, more intense, shaking the ground beneath their feet, the ice cracking open in jagged fissures. The wind, once howling, now began to pulse with a strange, unnatural rhythm, as though it were a living thing, a force they had no control over. The storm wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It was the planet's reaction to them, to their intrusion. In a panic, the alien leader ordered his crew to regroup, but even as they tried to form some semblance of order, the ground split again, and this time the shelter gave way entirely. The crew was thrown into the icy wilderness, the wind stinging their skin as they scrambled for any kind of shelter. But nothing they did seemed to help. The cold was unbearable, gnawing at their bones, and the storm seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. Amid the chaos, the alien leader caught a glimpse of something that sent a chill down his spine. The human, the one who had warned them so many times, was standing at the edge of the destruction, watching them, unmoving. His figure was barely visible in the swirling snow, but his presence was undeniable. The alien leader's heart skipped a beat. Was he somehow controlling this? Was he the one causing the planet to react so violently? How is this possible? The leader muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the wind. This is not just nature. This is something else. Then, suddenly, the human's voice rang out across the chaos. It was calm, almost too calm for the madness that surrounded them. You wanted to conquer this world. You wanted to take it from the people who have lived here for centuries. But this world has its own defense, and it won't let you take anything from it. The alien leader's mind raced. What did the human mean by the people who have lived here? Was there something more to this planet than they had realized? Had they unknowingly triggered something ancient, something more powerful than anything they had seen before? The storm intensified once again, and the alien leader felt his control slip further and further away. The cold, the storm, the shifting ice, they were all part of a greater force, one that they couldn't understand, couldn't predict. They were trapped, caught in the wrath of a world that wasn't simply a place to survive, but a living, breathing entity that had now turned against them. And in the distance, through the swirling snow and ice, the alien leader saw the human standing tall, unwavering, as though he were in complete control. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The humans hadn't just adapted to this planet. They had become part of it. And now, that very bond with the planet was their only chance of survival. But even as the storm raged around them, the alien leader couldn't shake the feeling that something even more dangerous was lurking just beyond the horizon. Something far more powerful than the storm. Something that would determine whether they lived, or if this world would claim them once and for all. The storm continued to howl, its fury now almost deafening, but something had changed. The wind no longer felt like a random force of nature. It was deliberate, controlled, and focused. The alien leader stumbled, barely keeping his balance against the vicious gusts, his mind racing to understand the true nature of the forces at play. He could see his crew struggling to maintain their footing, fighting to survive as the planet itself seemed to shake them apart. But in the midst of the chaos, the human stood still, as if anchored by the very storm itself. His eyes met the alien leaders, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. It wasn't just the human's calm demeanor that stood out now. It was the realization that he had been prepared for this. He had known what would happen. He had known the storm would rise to this intensity. "You still don't understand," the human said, his voice carrying across the howling wind, though there was no trace of fear or uncertainty in it. "This planet isn't just cold. It's a living organism, one that has existed for centuries, long before you ever set foot here. You thought you could control it. But it doesn't work that way. This world has its own rules." The alien leader's mind was racing. "What do you mean, rules?" he asked, his voice rough from the cold. "We didn't come here to control this planet. We came to understand it, to learn from it." "That's the mistake," the human said, his gaze never leaving the leaders. "You can't learn from it. You can't just take from it. You need to earn its respect. You need to survive it. And in order to do that, you must understand its heartbeat, its rhythm." The alien leader's confusion deepened, but before he could respond, the earth beneath them groaned again, louder this time, as though the planet itself was alive and warning them of what was to come. The snow swirled around them, so thick and fierce, it was impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The ice that had once surrounded them now seemed to shift and move, cracking open in places, revealing something far more terrifying than the storm outside. Suddenly, a massive fissure split the ground beneath them. The planet's deep rumbling intensified, as though it were waking up from a deep slumber, and from the chasm, a deep, bright glow began to emerge. It was a pulsating light, almost alive, pushing upward, sending waves of heat and light into the cold, stinging air. The alien leader's breath caught in his throat as the true horror of this world revealed itself. The human stepped forward, his face illuminated by the strange glow. "You think the storm was the threat? You think the cold was the enemy?" he said, his tone more somber now. "This isn't just a planet of ice. This world is connected to something older, something much more powerful than anything you've ever encountered." The alien leader's eyes widened as the ground shook violently, sending him to his knees. "What is it?" he gasped. The human's voice was steady, but it carried a weight of understanding. "It's the heart of the planet. It's alive, and it doesn't take kindly to invaders." The light from the chasm intensified, flooding the sky with its eerie brilliance. The alien leader could feel the warmth creeping into his limbs, but it wasn't enough to counter the overwhelming sense of dread. The heat was not a savior, it was a signal. The planet was waking up to fight back. Suddenly, the storm outside began to shift, and the alien leader could feel the air change. The wind slowed, the blizzards calmed, and the snow began to settle. The storm, which had once seemed so overwhelming, now felt as though it had been tamed. But the calm wasn't peaceful. It was the calm before the storm, the real storm. The ground trembled again, but this time it was different. The pulsating light from the chasm now reached out, as though the planet's very heart was calling out to something far beyond them. The human didn't flinch, though the alien leader felt the ground beneath him crack wide open. His crew scattered, panic setting in as the very foundation of the planet seemed to be unearthing itself. "You're not in control anymore," the human said, his voice almost a whisper now, but loud enough to be heard over the rumbling earth. This planet chooses who stays and who goes. It's not your tech, it's not your weapons. It's your survival instinct, your will. It's the only thing that can save you now. The alien leader's pulse raced. There was no more time for escape. The very air was thick with the heat from the glowing chasm, and the cold that had once numbed them now felt like it was being pushed back, replaced by an even greater force. The planet's heart was beating louder, faster, and with every beat, the tension in the air grew, as if the world itself was drawing its final breath before releasing something terrible. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shattered, and what emerged from the depths was a colossal form, a vast, almost incomprehensible mass, made entirely of ice and stone, with eyes that glowed like fire. It was a creature, but not like anything the alien leader had ever seen. It was the embodiment of the planet itself, a being forged from the very cold, the very storm that had been raging, a force of nature that had waited for centuries, millennia to be unleashed. The human stepped forward, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. The alien leader could barely understand what was happening. Was this creature an ally? Or was it the final judgment of the planet, ready to strike them down? And then, in a flash, everything changed. The creature's gaze turned to the human, and for the first time, the alien leader saw something unexpected in the human's eyes, not fear, not defiance, but understanding. The human had known this moment would come. He had known that the storm wasn't the real threat. He had known that the true test of survival was facing this creature, the living force of the planet. And in that moment, the alien leader understood. The human had never been afraid of the storm. He was one with it. Just as the alien leader began to grasp the magnitude of this revelation, the ground beneath them cracked again, and the world seemed to tilt. The creature's eyes flashed, and with one final deafening pulse, the storm erupted again, but this time it was no longer against them. It was part of them. The human turned to the leader, his expression unreadable. It's your choice now. Will you learn to live with this world, or will you be consumed by it? The alien leader had no answer. The true test had only just begun, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to survive it. As the world around them continued to shake, the alien leader was left frozen in place, caught between fear and awe. The colossal creature before them, this embodiment of the planet's heart, was so much more than they had ever anticipated. It wasn't just a force of nature, it was a sentient being, a guardian of the planet, born from the very ice and storms that had battered their ship. And standing in front of it was the human, calm, resolute, and strangely at peace with it all. The human's words echoed in the leader's mind. Will you learn to live with this world, or will you be consumed by it? The question lingered, heavy in the air, but there was no immediate answer. The leader's eyes darted between the towering creature and the human, now standing unarmed and open in front of the massive being. It took what felt like an eternity for the alien leader to gather his thoughts. The ground trembled beneath them, the ice cracking in jagged veins, but it was almost as if time had slowed, forcing him to confront the very meaning of survival. In the distance, he could see his crew, scattered, some trying to regroup, others simply trying to survive the storm. Their fate was uncertain, but now, standing before the force of the planet itself, he felt more powerless than ever. Are you going to destroy us? The alien leader asked, his voice trembling, more from realization than fear. The human slowly turned, his face expressionless but somehow reassuring. Destroy you? He repeated. No, this planet doesn't destroy. It protects. But you have to understand it. If you resist it, if you try to fight against it, it will never allow you to stay. But if you listen to it, if you can survive the challenge, then it might just allow you to exist in harmony with it. The alien leader looked down at his hands, unable to shake the weight of the human's words. His race had never learned to live in harmony with nature. They had always conquered, always sought to dominate. The alien leader had seen it firsthand, how his people had ravaged planets, using technology to bend every world they encountered to their will. They were creators, masters of their own destiny. At least, that's what they believed. But now, staring into the swirling storm and the glowing, ancient creature before them, he realized how naive that belief had been. Their tech advanced, sophisticated, capable of shifting entire ecosystems had failed them here. They had come to this planet believing it could be conquered, manipulated into a resource. Instead, they had awoken something that was far beyond their comprehension. The creature's glowing eyes turned back to the human, and for a moment, the alien leader saw something in its gaze that he had not expected: respect. It was as if the creature had judged the human, measuring his strength and resolve. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the storm began to abate, the ice and snow shifting back into their place, no longer threatening but part of the natural order. "How?" the alien leader asked, his voice almost a whisper. "How do you understand this world?" The human didn't respond immediately, his eyes still focused on the creature. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but powerful. "Because I didn't try to control it. I didn't come here to claim it. I came here to listen. This world speaks in ways that no technology can translate. It speaks in the wind, in the ice, in the rhythm of the storms. The real question isn't how we survive the cold, but how we survive the change." The alien leader's mind spun. Change. The storm, the creature, the relentless cold. It wasn't about survival of the fittest, nor about advanced technology. It was about understanding and adapting to the very forces that shaped this world. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had been blind to the deeper truth. His people had always taken from the universe, never truly learning from it. Perhaps that was why they had failed so often, why they had met resistance wherever they went. They had been too eager to dominate, too blind to learn from the world around them. "We've made a grave mistake," the alien leader admitted, his voice steadying with the realization. "We thought we could take, but we didn't understand what it meant to truly live here." The human nodded slowly, and the alien leader could sense that the human had known this all along. The human had understood the planet's language, had felt its heartbeat, and responded in kind. He had learned to live with the world, not against it. It was a lesson the alien leader had taken far too long to grasp. The creature before them emitted a low hum, a sound that vibrated through the ground, and in that moment the alien leader felt something he had never felt before: peace. The storm was still fierce, but it no longer seemed to threaten them. It had simply become part of the environment, part of the balance that governed this planet. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be a part of something larger, something that transcended their limited understanding. The alien leader turned to his crew, who were now gathering around him, their expressions wary but hopeful. They had seen the transformation in the environment, the sudden calmness of the storm. They had felt the change too, a shift in the atmosphere, as if the planet had taken notice of them. Some of them, still hesitant, watched the creature warily. Others, however, seemed to sense the same peace that the alien leader now felt. "We have a choice," the alien leader said, his voice resonating with newfound determination. "We can leave and return to our ships, knowing that this world will continue as it always has. Or we can choose to stay, to learn from it, to survive by its rules, and to honor the forces that shape it." The crew fell silent, each member contemplating the words. Some were still unsure, skeptical of what they were being asked to accept. But the leader's gaze locked onto the human, who stood so calmly before the towering creature, his eyes full of understanding. It was clear now that the humans had a deeper connection to this planet than they could ever hope to replicate with their technology. The alien leader took a deep breath and made his decision. He stepped forward, joining the human by the creature's side, his crew following his lead. The air felt different now, charged, alive with the potential for change. "I choose to stay," the alien leader said quietly, his words carrying in the stillness. "I choose to learn." The human nodded, a small but knowing smile on his face. "Welcome to the planet's heart," he said. "Here, we learn to live, not just survive." And in that moment, the storm faded away entirely. The creature, as if satisfied with their decision, gave one final hum and slowly withdrew into the chasm, leaving the alien leader and his crew standing in the clearing. The cold that had once been so unbearable now seemed less harsh, even welcoming. The icy winds, once a threat, now seemed like an old companion. The alien leader stood tall, his mind racing with the weight of everything he had learned in such a short span of time. This was no longer a planet to be conquered. It was a world to be understood, respected, and coexisted with. It was a living, breathing force that had fought to survive for eons, and now, perhaps, it would allow them to be a part of that survival. The human, his expression serene, turned to face the leader. "There's much to learn here," he said. "But the first lesson is this: survival isn't about domination. It's about balance." The alien leader looked out over the snowy expanse, the vastness of the planet stretching out before him. It was a beautiful world, harsh and unforgiving. It was a world that had waited patiently for someone to truly understand it. And now, with his crew by his side, the alien leader felt ready to face whatever the future held. But the real test, he knew, had only just begun. It wouldn't be easy. The planet would demand sacrifices, and there would be challenges they couldn't predict. Yet, for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. They were no longer outsiders. They were a part of this world, now, this cold, living world, and they would learn to survive together. And in that quiet moment, with the storm finally subsiding and the winds gentling into a whisper, the alien leader understood the true meaning of survival. It was not about conquering the world, but about becoming one with it. The storm, in the end, had never been their enemy. The real enemy had been their own arrogance. But now, with that arrogance stripped away, they had the chance to learn, to grow, and to live. And that, the alien leader realized, was a victory greater than any they could have imagined. The journey was far from over, but it was a beginning one that would change them all, forever.